welcome back to Franklin Covey's On Leadership series. By now you probably know my name is Scott Miller and I serve as your host and interviewer each week. Now today for the first time, we have reinvited a guest back, not for his second interview, but for his third interview. A, because he's my favorite guest, but B, because I think his content, his insights, his experience, his own character is so important for all of us as leaders to know, understand, and model in our roles. I want to reintroduce the renowned author, Stephen M.R. Covey, to On Leadership. Stephen, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Scott. It's always great to be with you.
You have other things to do than to come back as my third guest, but literally as part of the production team, I'm able to have some say in the guest, and we are large enough now to where we have guests booked 3 and 4 months out. You know, great CEOs and best-selling authors. It's been a wild ride. But every couple of weeks, the team says, let's have Stephen M.R. back on because although your content is not evolving, the principles are ironclad.
Right.
Your experience, your relevance is becoming more and more so. So today I'm excited to have you back on to talk about specifically the theme and the role that trust plays in innovation.
Great.
In building nimble, high-tolerant risk cultures. And I have in my hand an article you wrote recently in CEO Magazine about that topic. We'll get there in a moment.
Okay.
Congrats on the book.
Thank you.
Still doing extremely well. New York Times bestseller, Wall Street Journal #1, CEO Reads #1, Washington Post #1, every #1 list. You've lamented privately how you hit #2 on the New York Times. That gets a little under your skin, but don't let it, sir. 2 million copies sold stands for its own, right?
That's right.
The global influence of this is indisputable. Your father, of course, the famed Dr. Stephen R. Covey, you're one of 7? One of how many children?
Oh, one of 9.
One of 9 children, so I should know that by now.
Yeah.
The eldest child, correct? Of the boys, at least?
And the oldest son, yeah.
Eldest son.
2 older sisters.
2 older sisters, you're third in line. A lot of kids. It's hard to keep track of all 9, right?
It
Forgive me.
is. I do.
You've re-released the book in the past year. Similar cover. The content is the same. What's new in the new edition?
You know, we just updated the data and the information and also the examples and the stories just to be current and fresh and relevant. And that was a big idea behind the Speed of Trust in the first place, is to show how practical and tangible this is. So the content is the same, the principles are the same, but it's just refreshed with data, examples, stories, and metaphors and the like.
Great. Well, the book is still excelling extremely well. It outsells most books in the marketplace, but it doesn't earn a spot because you had your run on the bestseller list. But how many languages is it in?
22 languages.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. We were talking off air about how you speak Spanish pretty fluently. Do most of the publishers get the translation right, and you're pretty proud of how that ends up?
Well, I don't know because
Right.
I only speak Spanish, and so all the others I just have to assume that it is. But I think for the most part they do, and I know that our Franklin Covey team of licensee partners around the world usually get involved and they help to make sure that we get the translations right. But it's been exciting, and also I'll say this, Scott, that I personally have presented Speed of Trust in about 54 different countries in the last few years, and so that's always a thrill to see how these principles apply everywhere in the world. They're truly universal. Now the practices and the applications can be very contextual, very cultural, but the principles are universal. And that's been exciting to see trust really play itself out all around the world.
You were the CEO of the Covey Leadership Center, your father's firm, prior to it merging with Franklin Quest and 23 years ago becoming the Franklin Covey Company. So you have the unique vantage point of being a CEO of a large multinational corporation. You then took a little bit of a sabbatical. You wrote, you studied, you synthesized your learnings. How long has the book been out?
Book's been out 13 years now.
13 years?
Yeah.
Did you ever think it would be in 22 languages with 2 million copies sold? You
well,
hoped.
It was maybe my wildest dream.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I was hoping against hope that perhaps it could happen.
Yeah.
And just delighted that it has. And I think the reason it has kind of had staying power is that it has become so timely and relevant. I think it's more relevant today, Scott, than it was when I first published it.
I think it's more relevant today. You're exactly right. Yeah.
Because it's so, people are talking about it. It's the new currency.
Well, I also want to pay you a compliment. I think that your brand, honestly, the congruence with which you choose to live your life, professionally and personally, you're the best possible evangelist for the content, because everyone who meets you, everyone who knows you, that works in our firm, from our chairman, Bob Whitman, down to the receptionist and across all parts of the organization, know you to be a man of at least striving to walk your talk like your dad.
Yeah. Well,
so I pay you that compliment.
Thank you very much.
Let's dig in.
I strive.
A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of listening in on a discussion you were having with one of our publicists about this article you were writing for CEO Magazine. Just came out, I think, in July, is that right?
Yeah,
this year,
July.
Right? Widely well read now. And what I love about the article is you share a fascinating insight around Blockbuster and Netflix, which really speaks to the role that innovation plays. Kind of walk us through your insights on why Blockbuster became Blockbuster and why Netflix is where they are, and kind of share some of the insights from the article.
Yeah, well, the article is called Nothing Fails Like Success. Yeah. And it comes from the historian Arnold Toynbee, the whole idea that, you look at civilizations and they have a challenge that comes and they learn to create an innovative response to that challenge. The challenge comes, good response, that's success. But then the nature of the challenge changes and their once successful response no longer works. That's the idea of nothing feels like success. So in this case, Blockbuster was an entertainment company and they were succeeding, and they had physical stores and the like, and people would go in there and buy the videos. We all know this, or rent the videos. And they went through transitions with technology from beta to VHS to DVDs, but the world was changing, and you saw streaming coming online, and it's going to happen, and they didn't evolve and change with it fast enough. Whereas Netflix, by contrast, from the very beginning anticipated that things were going to go to streaming. So they came out with the DVD by mail, but they didn't call themselves DVD by mail. They called themselves Netflix even before the technology was created, because they knew where the puck was going to be, to use Wayne Gretzky metaphor. And they said, we're going to go to streaming at some point, but we'll start off with DVDs by mail, and we'll be prepared. They were 2 steps ahead of the game. And they actually had approached Blockbuster about saying, why don't you, we'll be your online streaming partner. But Blockbuster was too wed to their old model of physical stores, and also the model of collecting late fees from customers.
It was a big part of their revenue, wasn't it?
Huge part of their revenue was late fees. They couldn't do it. They couldn't.
The business model was so successful and deeply entrenched, they couldn't see past that.
They couldn't see past it, or they didn't want to, or they were afraid to, and therefore, nothing fails like success. Their past successful response of physical stores with late fees and their old model was no longer relevant for the new opportunity, the new challenges in society. And now they went from some 9,000 stores, there's 1 left.
Is it Alaska?
I don't know where it is.
I saw a documentary about it.
Yeah, I just read there was 1 store left, but whereas Netflix has had phenomenal success around the world with subscribers, but they're always staying ahead of the curve, and they're very innovative, but they're also built upon trust. They have what they call freedom and responsibility, and the whole idea that, look, we're going to give a lot of freedom to our people. That's trust to our people, but with that comes a lot of responsibility to be responsible to the trust being given to you. But they create an environment where people are innovative, and it's not they're encouraged to take a risk, even make a mistake, as long as they learn, get better, stay ahead of the curve. They innovate, and they succeed. And so just the contrast, and that's one that we all understand and get because we're consumers of it, right? And the contrast between what happened with Blockbuster, not innovating, what happened with Netflix, innovating. And trust is really foundational to all of that.
I know this story to be accurate because just a few days ago we interviewed Patty McCord on this set, who was the former chief people talent officer at Netflix. She helped to found it with Reed Hastings. And they used a frame where they only hire what they call fully formed adults. And then she challenged it and said, well, Reed says no one's ever fully formed, but so at least we hire adults. But they do have this high trust, high accountability culture. But I'm guessing from discussion with her, the freedom to innovate and to think there is tremendously present and tangible at Netflix.
Absolutely. The reality is you're not going to innovate if people don't feel like they can make a mistake and learn. And they won't feel that way if they don't feel that there's trust there, that people have their back, that they're allowed to take a risk, a responsible risk.
But it's deliberate behaviors by leaders. A mutual friend of ours, Chuck Farnsworth, who you hired, and he was the founder of the education division. He hired me, has now one of my lifelong friends and mentors. When I first came to work for him at FranklinCovey, the Covey Leadership Center, he had a concept in the division called pre-forgiveness, where Chuck would say, I'm not sure it was his term, you probably learned it from your dad or your uncle or yourself, and he talked about how you're going to make mistakes. It's okay. You can't bring the house down, right? You're empowered to make these level of decisions, come to me beyond those, but it raised the level in the team where you didn't want to have to cash your chit in with Chuck, right? You wanted to take your level of risk because he so trusted you, but you didn't want to go over the edge for fear he had to bail you out. And I think this concept of pre-forgiveness is maybe not a precursor from trust, but it grows out of trust, does it not?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you're going to make mistakes. Some of them are going to be okay. Don't go too far, right?
Absolutely. It's an extraordinary declaration of trust. He's saying, look, I trust your judgment.
I hired you.
I hired you. You're a winner. I hire winners. I trust your judgment to try to do the right thing. And yes, you're going to push the envelope. Don't go too far.
Right.
So there's trust there.
Right.
And don't go too far. But I trust that if you take a risk, it's because you're trying to be responsible about it and trying to innovate and create. And that pre-forgiveness is basically saying, look, there's a net here. and you can take a risk.
Right.
And you've got a net to fall into if you need it. But be responsible about it. And there's a huge trust. And what I like about what you just said, Scott, is how you responded to it. You didn't want to say, I'm going to take advantage of this, do whatever I want.
The opposite.
The opposite.
And then it worked so well in his division. I mean, his retention was high.
Yeah.
And it became a mantra of my own. My part of his legacy was me instituting it, hopefully, in the teams that I've led. Your Netflix example is visceral, but it's also maybe a little bit lofty for some. We don't all work for Netflix, right? Yeah. You shared an example in a previous discussion I had about a recent speech and consulting engagement with a university. Would you talk about the level of trust this new leader was placing in their team? Because I think it's more tangible and inspiring for all of us.
Yeah. Well, this is, I got permission to share. It's Pepperdine University, and it's Jim Gash. He's coming in, California. Right? And Jim Gash is coming in, the brand new president, and he's, getting to know his team that's there, and he's got some deans of the schools, and one of the deans had come up to him and said, look, I'm excited to work with you. I've got this project I'm working on. Here's this thing I need to move forward with this. I assume you're going to need to...
Like a white paper?
Yeah, white paper to look at this, to approve it, and this and that, but I feel really strong about this and really good. That's right, but it's going to take you some time to do it, to read. It'll probably at least be 45 minutes, maybe a lot longer. And he said, you know what? He stopped him and he said, Michael, I trust you. You can move ahead with this. If you feel strong about it, you can move ahead. I'll get caught up on stuff later, but right now we need to move. You feel strong about this. I trust you. And the interesting thing was that, and Jim said this in front of me, in front of Michael, the whole team, he goes, I don't know Michael well, because I'm brand new in this role, and Michael and I are new in our relationship. But I know people that know Michael well, and they all tell me he's gold. And I trust them, and they say, I can trust Michael, so I start with trust. It's a better starting point. And we move farther, we move faster. And you know what? The interesting thing, I talked to Michael, and I said, how did you respond to this? He said, you know what? I want to prove that trust justified.
Yeah, right.
I want to rise to the occasion. I want to perform better. That story will go like
wildfire across campus, right?
It will. It will. And it'll basically be saying, look, Jim trusts us, and no one wants to let Jim down. And we want to perform at our very best and give it back to him. So you not only help people perform better, but they reciprocate and return the trust. It becomes a virtuous upward spiral. And that's really, really powerful, is you start by extending trust to people and they give it back to you, and it brings out the very best in them.
Stephen, you're spending a lot of your time writing, interviewing, speaking, consulting at board level, CEO level, major government leaders. We all hear the value that speed has. You were cool before speed was cool, right? You were talking about speed for a decade now, but you hear this everywhere, right? That everything's about innovation, nimbleness, speed to market. Break down for the millions of leaders that are listening or watching today, what's the correlation between a low trust culture and a slow culture and a high trust culture and a fast, nimble, innovative environment?
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing. Trust always impacts two measurable outcomes, always. Speed and cost. And when the trust goes down, in any relationship or on a team, in a company, with a customer partner, in a culture, when the trust goes down, you will always find that the speed will go down with it. Everything will take you longer to do, a lot longer. And the cost will go up. It will cost you a lot more. That is a tax, a low trust tax. And why is this true? Because you now got it, when there's low trust, you got to take all these steps to compensate for that lack of trust. Whether it be checking, verifying, validating, or dealing with the redundancy and the bureaucracy and the rules and the levels and the layers that tend to get put in place in lower trust environments. That is a tax. It's a low trust tax. But here's the good news, is that when the trust goes up in that relationship, or when it goes up on the team, in the company, in the culture, with customers, with partners, in the marketplace, when the trust goes up, the speed goes up with it. You can do everything faster, infinitely faster. The cost comes down. That is a dividend, a high trust dividend. And Scott, it's that simple. It's that powerful, that predictable, and it's playing out everywhere. Just the example I just gave you, Dr. Jim Gash, just extending trust. He moves fast. And, you didn't have to spend that time researching this. He trusted this person. It was not a blind trust. It was a smart trust because of the context behind it and the people that knew him, that validated and vouched for him.
That person had built a credibility.
He built a credibility. Right. He had a reputation. Right. He had a brand.
Right.
And he didn't need to micromanage him right at the outset. Instead, he wanted to extend trust to him, and you move fast. Nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. Nothing is as agile as a culture of trust, because you can respond and adapt and be entrepreneurial. And when there's so much change and disruption hitting us from every angle, we need that agility. We need trust to help create the culture of the agile culture and the speed that is so vital. So that's why it's so
Stephen,
critical.
what would you say to the senior executive leaders who are listening to you and say, yeah, it all makes sense, it's intuitive, but I can't afford to have a lengthy document put out in public that would take me 45 minutes to read. It obviously has some gravitas. I'm probably going to edit some pieces of it. I need to make it better and make sure that it's on brand. What counsel do you give to the senior executive that would say, I can't afford to take 45 minutes, but I also can't afford to have significant things put out in public that don't have my permission or my authority, because I probably could make it better. Perhaps they could.
Yeah, perhaps they could. And again, this is not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
There might be other situations where the smart thing to do would be to say, hey, let me help collaborate with you on this, and we'll do something together that we can make it even better. So it all depends on the context. Some situations, maybe I'm going to get involved and say, hey, I want to be a collaborative partner to you. But in other situations, like the one that Jim Gash was describing, it was something that basically was entirely in the domain of his dean, and he felt like,
nothing
to
add
add.
To it?
I trust you.
Yeah.
And so, it's good judgment. And you find that sweet spot, and you look at the context. What am I extending trust on? The situation. What's the job to be done? Am I extending trust?
Is the value I'm going to add worth offsetting the low trust that will become from me micromanaging your project?
Yeah. So what's the context? What's the job to be done? What am I extending trust on? What's the risk involved? Is it just like the example of the pre-forgiveness? Chuck said, can't have anything that's going to take us down. If it's too risky, I'm not going to extend that much trust. That's not smart. What's the risk involved? What's the credibility of the person or the people involved? And then those combination, those three variables, the situation, the risk, and the credibility of the person, helps give you a sense of judgment. You use good judgment of when to trust, maybe when not to trust quite as much, or how much to trust. But my whole point is that when you can trust, when you can extend that trust, you get all kinds of dividends. You move faster, you get greater creativity, innovation, people rise to the occasion, and they give it right back to you.
Talk about virtual environments.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess there's some correlation with the most agile, nimble, innovative companies are also hiring people from around the country and the world. They're not all situated in a couple mile area. Are there any insights you would add or offer to leaders that are trying to grow, trying to build a culture with a dispersed workforce? It's harder to build trust with someone who you have never met. You might see once a week on a video conference, a Zoom call or something. Any tangible tidbits you might give someone to say how you extend and build trust in a virtual environment?
Yeah, well, let me say this, that the virtual environment increasingly is becoming the new normal.
Right.
The new norm, and we're seeing it more and more. I just was with an organization that had, a supply chain that was worldwide with people that have never met each other physically, face to face, and probably never will. and yet they were a team working together and collaborating. So that's kind of the reality. And it is a little bit more difficult. I acknowledge that. The degree of difficulty of the dive, to use the Olympic metaphor for diving, is higher when it's virtual or dispersed. But the principles are the same. It's just that you have to be more intentional about it, more deliberate about it, more explicit about the trust that you're giving and why. And you go in, you declare your intent. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's why we're trying to do it. And here's our expectations. Here's how we'll be accountable to each other. But you still operate on the same principles of declaring intent, clarifying expectations, practicing accountability. It's just that you're more explicit and deliberate about it. And people tend to respond to that. Here's what's interesting, Scott, is that today we have so many technology tools for collaboration. Yeah. That's the good news, is that we got these great technology tools to collaborate. The question is, do we have the trust to be able to collaborate? And if you think about it, trust is the ultimate collaboration tool. I just was at a conference speaking where they were talking about global supply chains. It was a supply chain conference. And the basic premise was, we have the technology to do everything we need to do. It exists to collaborate. The question is whether we have the trust to collaborate across borders, across functions, sometimes across industries even. And so, in a sense, trust is the ultimate collaboration tool. But we have to be intentional and deliberate about it.
Is trust a luxury that is talked about in good economic times, but for the skeptic, it's just not realistic in high growth, high innovative companies because they can't afford to take missteps or take risks because one big one could put them behind a week or two from a competitor?
I think just the opposite. I think it's even more vital in difficult times because that's when we have to be more agile, more creative, more innovative, come up with solutions. And again, I don't want to put myself in front of my skis. We're not talking about a blind trust where we just go out and say, hey, do whatever you want. The whole Silicon Valley mantra, fail often, fail fast, fail forward. Right. That's a good approach, but it's always within a context. Just like Chuck Farnsworth gave you a context of saying, look, this is not, don't take the firm down, don't go too far. Right. Same with Silicon Valley. They're saying fail forward, fail often, fail fast, learn, innovate. But they're also usually will draw a box around it so that they're not too exposed. And so again, I'm not saying you extend trust in areas that are too risky and too vulnerable that could really hurt the firm. But what you're trying to do is create the right environment, the culture where people are not afraid to take a responsible risk because they know that they have you back. Let me just say this. Here's what's fascinating about this trust, high trust cultures and innovation. A recent study from LRN called the How Report shows this, that in a high trust culture, when there's high trust, people are 32 times more likely to take a responsible risk than they are in a low trust culture, and they're 11 times more likely to innovate. You think about that. In a low trust culture, when there's low trust, people will always be afraid to take a risk. They'll be afraid to make a mistake. And as a result, though, they won't learn and they won't innovate. And I love how Jeff Bezos says it from Amazon. He says, invention and failure are inseparable twins.
You write that in your article. Right?
Yeah. And if you're not willing to fail, you won't invent. You won't innovate. You won't create. Now look, that's all got to be in context, within a parameter. Otherwise, it could become a blind trust and make you're too vulnerable. So again, not one size fits all. It's good judgment.
Talk about low trust cultures. Why do organizations break the trust of their employees? How does a culture devolve? What's happening when you enter an organization and it's got a broken low trust culture? What's been happening specifically?
Yeah, well, a lot of times you'll see that they're trapped in a vicious cycle of what I call counterfeit behavior. Yeah. And everyone's spinning. Everyone's bad-mouthing, they're gossiping. I loved your little article that you did on how gossip will kill a team in the culture.
That came from you.
Yeah, well, the whole idea is to show loyalty. You speak about people as if they were present. Yeah. And the counterfeit behavior, the finger pointing, the blaming, the hidden agendas, and people can get trapped in that. And these are good people. Most organizations, most teams have good people not trying to do evil, bad things.
They're just surviving in the system they've learned to live in.
They've learned to live in that system and survive. I just was with another organization where they're talking about how in the culture, no one wanted to be the bearer of bad news because historically the bearer of the bad news got shot. And so everyone would sugarcoat it, spin it, dance around it. But the problem was the right, accurate information was not getting to the senior leader and they couldn't act upon it. And it was kind of like, why don't you just tell them? Well, the consequences are too great. And so it was not flat out lying, but it was just kind of the spin and the sugarcoating, the survival tactics to stay alive.
Stephen, I'm going to ask a couple fast round questions. Talk to an entrenched leader of a team who's part of the problem, and she or he's beginning to recognize it right now. That for whatever reason, right? It's all they've known. They've been trying to survive, and they want to change their culture. They've been part of the problem. They want to tomorrow begin to change their culture from low trust to high trust and become more nimble. What are some things that entrenched leaders can do tomorrow to transition out of that culture?
Yeah. First thing is you have to declare your intent. Because if you just start doing things without talking about it, everyone's going to say, what's he doing now?
Yeah.
What's she up to now?
They're going to suspect that something's up.
They're going to read something into it. They're going to project different agendas and wonder what they're trying to get out of us, what are they preparing us for? And so you got to declare your intent. And even then, when there's low trust and you declare your intent, oftentimes people don't believe you. And they think still, what's the agenda here? But if you're consistent with
it. To behave yourself into a reputation of credibility.
Right. So you start by declaring your intent.
Right.
Here's what we're trying to do. Here's why I'm open. There's no hidden agenda. It's an open agenda. I'm transparent. I declare it. I declare myself. I love how Doug Conant from the former CEO of Campbell Soup Company, one of his key principles is to declare yourself. You're open. You're transparent. Here's who I am. And declare your intent. Here's what I'm all about. Then you're exactly right. Now, having done that, now I got to model it. I got to do what I say I'm going to do. I just said this is what I'm trying to do, and now I got to model it. So I tell people what to look for, and then I model it. So I might say, so we're trying to build trust here. We're trying to build this relationship. So here's what you can know about me. If I make you a commitment, I'm going to keep it. Because I won't make a commitment I won't keep. If I talk to you, I'm going to talk straight. I'm not going to spin and tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to tell you what's really true. If I have an issue or problem with you, I'll come to you. I won't go around your back or go to somebody else. If I have an agenda, it'll be an open agenda. Not a hidden agenda. See, I'm telling people what I'm going to do. I'm signaling my behavior. So I declare my intent, I signal my behavior, and then I do what I say I'm going to do. And I model it. I follow through on that. And people say, aha, Scott told me he was going to try to do this. He told me what he was going to do, and I see him doing it. And I start to say, maybe it is different this time. Maybe I could trust it this time. And I begin to be open to new possibilities.
Same advice you would give to a new leader joining a team that has a low trust culture. They should do the same exact thing.
It is the same advice.
Right.
So the principles are the same. No, yeah, but it's just that you also acknowledge in a low trust culture to begin with, as a new leader or what have you, or where maybe you've been the problem in the past. If you were the problem in the past and you're trying to change, as my father used to say, and you know this so well as well, you can't talk yourself out of a problem that you behaved yourself into. So if each of us have been part of the problem and we're trying to change, we got to behave our way out. And that will take some time, and it has to be consistent and demonstrated, but you can behave your way out of the problem that you behaved your way into. You can't talk your way out, but you can behave your way out. So that's, the reality. But someone else might come in brand new. They were not part of the problem, but they inherit a low trust team or culture. There's an inheritance tax, and they need to do the same things. They need to declare their intent. They need to tell people what they're going to do, and then do what they say they're going to do. I'd add one more thing. They ought to also start with listening first. And, as my father says in 7 Habits, seek first to understand, then to be understood. In Speed of Trust, I say listen first. And the whole idea is you listen with the intent to understand. And most leaders come in charging, wanting to take charge and show what they can do. And they almost skip that step, thinking maybe that's a sign of weakness or inaction, when in fact, it's an extraordinary behavior that will build the trust, because when people feel understood, they tend to trust you. And when they don't feel understood or heard at all, they tend to be fighting for the air and trying to fight you and maybe not fully trust you. And so, it takes you some time, but then you move fast. So with people, fast is slow and slow is fast. So you got to listen first and really seek to understand. And that's another thing I see Jim Gash doing at Pepperdine is he started on a listening tour, and he came in as the new president. You know what? He met with all 36 Board of Regents members one-on-one in their homes.
Wow.
Met with every dean, met with all the different people, had these one-on-one meetings.
Took the time
not efficient
for those relationships.
That's right. He wasn't trying to be efficient,
right.
Trying to be effective. And by starting with that kind of listening, that kind of behavior, listening first, builds trust.
I think that's an insight, because I've written in some of the books that I've been a part of writing and the things that I've learned from you and your father, one of my biggest struggles is differentiating between my proclivity to be efficient,
right,
and the necessity for me to be effective. And that I'm going to bet that a lot of entrepreneurial CEOs, leaders of very fast-paced teams, confuse the need, like I do, to be efficient with being effective. You're efficient with things and processes and tools, even some meetings, but you can't be efficient with people.
Can't.
And I'm going to bet that when you've got an organization who's trying to build an innovative, fast-paced culture, when they have a low-trust culture, it may often be because the leader unintentionally is treating all things efficiently and with a fast mindset like I do, when you have to know what to be efficient on and what to be effective on. No doubt this new president of the university had lots of things that they needed to tackle.
Mm-hmm. And he is.
But he slowed, and I'm guessing took weeks to have these 26 one-on-one meetings.
36.
36.
Yeah, that was just with the Board of Regents, plus the dozens of other meetings he had internally.
50 plus people.
Not just weeks, actually took months.
Yes.
And he did this all as he prepared to take over as the new leader, and then also in this first little bit as the new leader. But yes, absolutely right. It's
counterintuitive, because people want to have quick wins. You come in the job, you want to show that you're there to solve problems and fix things. Sometimes that efficiency paradigm to get quick fixes can be damaging.
Well, it can be damaging. And again, I'm not against inaction and and all these things too. So it's always a balancing act. You look at the situation in the context. In this case, the president had a little bit of time because he was announced as the new president, but he wasn't going to take over for a few months. So he had that time.
It's a runway.
He was able to do it. In other situations, someone might have to take over right away. But you still can operate by listening first. When I was with Mike Garrett of Georgia Power, when he first got in as president at Georgia Power, here's what happened. He came in and he started with saying, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to understand. I'm going to listen before I try to do anything. Because I will learn better and I will do better when I do start to do things if I come in and understand first. And then he was a very decisive leader. It's just that he got his bearings and he got his sense of gravitas from that. So it's just a better starting point. And you said it, Scott. You be efficient with things, you be effective with people, you manage things, you lead people. And it's a better way to approach things and to move forward. And you'll get better results in the long run. Can I give you one more illustration of this? And this is also ties into not only the speed and the agility, but also the innovation. Eric Yuan is the CEO of Zoom. Zoom video communications. A lot of people are using Zoom. We use Zoom. Right. Others using Zoom, and they're a startup. I mean, they were only around since 2011, and they've moved fast. Eric Yuan, by the way, in Glassdoor, Glassdoor rates, CEO people rate, anonymous ratings. That's a brutal rating system.
It is.
He was number one on the list this last year. Number one, 99% approval rating. I couldn't get 50% for my own kids. I mean, this is right at the top. So highly trusted. But he made this point that they had their big Zoomtopia, their annual users meeting conference, and he invited me to speak because he thinks trust is their key secret sauce. And in this introduction, he said, look, if you start with trust, you do everything better and faster, and you innovate better, and you move fast. And for an entrepreneurial company, speed is everything. And there's nothing as fast as the speed of trust. And with trust, we move fast. Without it, we move slow. And that's why trust is everything, he said. And his whole point was that there's a speed to trust. He was kind of validating this message from his own experience and practice. But it also was not just the speed. It was the creativity, the innovation, the entrepreneurship that comes from that. And because they were able to be so agile and so responsive to changes and opportunities in the marketplace when there was high trust in the culture. And it's just a great illustration of kind of a leader coming in, building a high trust team and culture, being able to move fast as a result of it, but also being able to be extraordinarily creative and innovative and taking huge market share in a short period of time.
Stephen, when you wrote this book, I don't imagine you could envision its impact, but you led a team that then converted the content of this book into a work session that can be used with boards of directors, the C-suite, rolled out through companies. It can be taught in 3 hours, 1 day, 2 days, depending upon the nature of the implementation. Yeah. I recall a couple of years ago where you helped a global organization not just build a culture of trust in their own institution, but they actually then offered the course to their suppliers, their vendors, their partners, their contractors. They wanted the entire kind of end-to-end customer, if you will, to all be a part of what it was their key value proposition. They were actually a food company, right?
That's right.
But they actually invested in so that there was transparency and mutual benefit of realizing trust across the entire system.
And across the entire value chain.
Right.
All dimensions of it. And here was their premise, Scott. It was that they wanted everyone to have a common framework, a common language.
Not just their employees, but their partners and vendors.
Their partners, their vendors, and the entire supply chain,
right.
and even up into the board, and into the parent company, and all the different dimensions of it, saying, look, this is who we are, this is what we're about, and if we can have a common framework, a way of thinking about this, a common language so we can talk about it, most importantly, an intentional process of how we're going to build it together, then we can do it at every level and every layer. And so the CEO led it, and it became the true differentiator. They called it the true value differentiator of what enabled them to have extraordinary success.
Wow, to this day.
And the great thing is it didn't start with the CEO. It started with a side pocket.
Right, like
an HR
leader,
person,
right?
leader, becoming very, very proactive at building their circle of influence, building a high trust team and culture that then spread throughout their team into the business units. And they saw how they built high trust. They became trusted partners. And that they needed this, they could use this. And then it ultimately bubbled up to the CEO, who saw the value of this, applied it to his team, took it to the entire organization, and then said, now let's take it to the value chain.
Wow.
And the economics of that, the speed of that. But I'll tell you another thing, Scott. It's not just the economics of trust, greater speed, lower cost. That gets people's attention because everyone wants to have economic success. Mm-hmm. But in the long run, the even greater principle behind this is what trust does to people, how it creates energy and joy, happiness, innovation, creativity, inspiration. And we need that. People are looking for that. People don't want to be managed. They want to be led.
They enjoy coming to work.
They enjoy coming to work. They want to be inspired. They want to be trusted. A great place to work, that type of thing. Trust does that like nothing else. The whole Great Place to Work Institute, all their work starts with trust as the foundation, because that's the defining characteristic of what makes a company a great place to work. Mutual trust. And it brings out the very best in people. So as much as trust impacts speed and cost, and it's incalculable what it does, the greater impact in the long run is around energy and joy. And by energy, I mean innovation, creativity, passion, commitment, inspiration, engagement of people, and joy. It's happiness, fun, satisfaction. We all love being part of a high trust team. It energizes people. I think of Warren Buffett acquiring these companies. They come in, they've been acquired, they're all independently wealthy. They don't have to work for him. He doesn't even have contracts with them. They could go anywhere they want and they stay. Because he trusts them.
Right.
And he says, I trust you. He's got 77 direct reports. He trusts them. And they stay with them, and they're inspired by it, and no one wants to let Warren down. And so the quantitative is huge. I start with that because that's kind of the business idea. It's the breakthrough, and that's a paradigm shift. Many people never thought of trust as economic. And when you say it's economic, that gets their attention. But what sustains this is the leadership case for trust. How it's the one thing that changes everything. How it's a multiplier for everything else you're trying to do, including creativity, innovation, our topic for today, as well as passion and inspiration.
You are burdened with the weight of this famous name, right? But you've gone out and carved your own voice, and no doubt you're still super proud of your father's legacy. He wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is its 30th anniversary, 30 million copies sold. The book is being reissued in I think, the spring of this next year. What do you think is your dad's biggest legacy with you? It's just yourself.
Well, with me, it's him as my father, not as this great thought leader.
Something he taught you in particular?
Well, yeah. I would say this, that what I saw him model and what I saw him live, and he also taught it, and that is that his power was around his integrity to what he believed. And he would teach that to me, and then I saw him live it in how he interacted with me and with everybody else. And I've said this before, that my father was good on stage and he was better off stage. Mm-hmm. And he could wow people with a presentation with great insight, but then he really wowed people when he walked off stage and treated everyone with the utmost respect. True. And the time he would take to listen to somebody, and the affirmation he would give to someone. And so he modeled the kind of integrity around, practicing what he preached. He wasn't perfect. He had made his mistakes too, and he'd get asked, do you live the 7 habits? And he'd respond, about 80% of the time. And he always tried 100%, but he fell short too. Yeah. But he always modeled that. And so that'd be maybe one thing. If I could give a second, Scott, it would be how he affirmed me and most everyone he came in contact. And his definition of leadership, as you know, was seeing and communicating people's worth and potential so clearly that they become inspired to see it in themselves. And that's what he did with me. He saw my worth, my potential, so clearly that I came to see it myself. And it started when I was 7 years old, when he taught me how to take care of the yard, the lawn, the old green and clean story.
The famous green and clean story in the book.
That's right. That's a trust story.
Yeah.
It's a trust story. It's a belief in me story to my work with him, and we worked together on building Covey Leadership Center, to doing the merger, becoming FranklinCovey, to the thrill I had in my father's later years when I found my voice and I had something to say around Speed of Trust, when he and I would do some events together, and
magical, huh?
It was amazing. I look back on that with such fondness. What a rare opportunity. And it would be great because my father would introduce me by telling the green and clean story and get a kind of a big laugh of, I didn't know what to do. I was overwhelmed. And then I'd get up and I'd tell the story about how my dad left my mom on the side of the road one time in a travel situation.
That's not in the book, though, is it? No.
I actually did put that in the book.
Did you
I put it in the book. It's a fun story.
For those who haven't read The 7 Habits, which is like 5 people left, there's a great story. If you haven't read it, pick it up, around this idea of one of his young sons being taught kind of how to have a negotiation around keeping the yard green and clean. And you're the famous son. Your father has passed now 7 years ago. The book continues to be as popular as it was during his years here. I see the numbers every week. It's phenomenal. Your mother's still alive.
Yes.
How's your mom doing?
She's doing well.
She's hanging in there?
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah. We adore her.
Well, the Covey brand is as strong as ever. Thank you for your contribution to Franklin Covey's content. The trust offering we have can be found at FranklinCovey.com. I hope everybody enjoys the interview. And what's next for you? Where are you spending your time?
Well, I'm really continuing to focus on trust, applying it to a leadership context and the style of leadership that is so needed today. Taking this whole idea, nothing feels like success, and saying the world has changed, but our style of leadership too often has not. And we need a new style of leadership that's relevant for our times, and for the agileness, the entrepreneurship, the agility, the speed, the multiple generations at work, the inspiration that's needed. And that is all around trust and inspire.
You're speaking to senior teams, boards of directors. You're keynoting a lot of conferences still.
Absolutely.
You're how many miles? 3, 4, 5 million?
I'm almost at 7 million. And
7 million?
That's on Delta alone, and another million on the other airlines.
Wow.
And so a lot of travel, all around the world.
It's got to be gratifying, though, to be doing your piece in building peace.
Well, it is just that. I feel like that, we see a crisis of trust in the world.
Yeah.
where trust is going down. You look at the Edelman
Right
Trust
here at home.
Barometer, other things, trust in media, government, political parties, business, going down.
Political leaders.
In political leaders, in some cases, never been lower. So that's a reality. There's a crisis of trust. But here's the paradox of that, Scott, is simultaneously, in the midst of this crisis of trust, paradoxically, there is also a renaissance of trust taking place, of people, of leaders, of organizations that are saying there's a better way to lead. You're interviewing them on leadership, this webcast and podcast. You're interviewing many of them, and they're talking about many of these leaders from the Patty McCords and others out there that are saying there's a better way to lead. There's a better way to operate. You can build high trust in a low trust world, and in fact, it's a huge advantage. You cut through the noise and the clutter, you have a huge advantage that's hard to replicate elsewhere. And so that's the paradox. In the midst of the crisis of trust, there's a simultaneous renaissance of trust. And I see my role to be a co-catalyst with many others, including you, to help bring about a renaissance of trust in our world. We need more trust in our world, not less. And while it takes two people to have trust, it only takes one to start. And Scott, each of us can be that one.
Stephen, you might be my fourth guest coming on. Thank you for coming back for the third time.
You're welcome.
Great luck on the next million miles around the nation. If you want to get in touch with Stephen, you can visit speedoftrust.com or franklincovey.com. Follow him on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. He's everywhere. And he's, of course, always available for speaking engagements in your company and working with your C-suite staff as well. Stephen, thanks again.
Great to be with you, Scott.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back here next week for another guest for On Leadership. If you're not subscribing to the On Leadership newsletter, it is now the fastest growing and largest newsletter dedicated to the topic of leadership. It's complimentary, comes out every Tuesday morning around 6 o'clock Eastern Time via email. It features an audio and video interview just like the one today with Stephen, as well as a downloadable tool from FranklinCovey's large tool chest, as well as a blog article written by me. It's complimentary. Visit On Leadership on the FranklinCovey website and subscribe your entire team. And we'll see you back here next week. Thanks for joining us.